With straight line depreciation, we express the useful life as a period of time, like years or months. Sometimes it makes sense to express the useful life in something other than time. For example, let's say we have a vehicle, and you can say this vehicle will last me 5 years, or you can say it will last me 150,000 miles, which is typically how we express the life of a vehicle. Now, this type of thing makes sense if we're talking about vehicles or machinery that will produce so many units, or other things like that. And we can use a slightly different method called the units of production method to calculate depreciation. This is very similar to the straight line depreciation method. It's still going to be cost minus salvage value divided by the useful life. The difference here is that instead of years, the useful life is going to be in miles. So let's take a vehicle for an example. And in this example, we're going to say this vehicle, we're estimating it will last us 200,000 miles. So we'll take the cost and we'll subtract the salvage value. That gives us a $100,000 depreciable base. And then we take that 100,000 and divide it by our estimated useful life, or 200,000 miles. And that gets us 50 cents per mile. Now all we have to do is calculate how many miles we drive every year, and that will help us figure out our depreciation expense. So here I have the years 1 through 5, and in year 1 we drove 45,000 miles. If it costs us 50 cents per mile, the depreciation expense is 22,500. And our accumulated depreciation is still 22,500. Book value, again, remember book value is cost minus accumulated depreciation. So I'm just going to bring up a calculator and I'll do 110,000 minus 22,500. That gets me 87,500 as my book value. The next year, I drove 35,000 miles. At 50 cents per mile, that costs 17,500 for depreciation. Accumulated depreciation is now up to 40,000. So the total of all depreciation expense prior to this. And book value would be 70,000. So that's 110,000 minus 40,000. For the third year, I drove 40,000 miles at 50 cents per mile. That's $20,000. My accumulated depreciation is 60,000. And 110,000 minus 60,000 is $50,000 on the book value. In the fourth year, I drove 50,000 miles at 50 cents per mile. That's 25,000. I'm up to 85,000 of accumulated depreciation. And that should be $25,000 left on my book value. The last year, we're going to have to be a little careful, but let's just assume we're doing 50 cents per mile. And the depreciation expense then would be $20,000. And that would make my accumulated depreciation $105,000 and my book value at $5,000. The problem with this is that my book value cannot go below the salvage value. And my accumulated depreciation cannot go above my depreciable base. So for this last year, I have to be careful that I do not go over the allowed amount of depreciation. So often this happens with vehicles or things like we think it will last us 200,000 miles and we get a little bit of extra out of it. So just for this year, we have to say that we have a maximum allowed amount of 15,000, which is a maximum of 30,000 miles in this case. And so we just ignore that last 10,000 miles. So maximum of 30,000. And so our accumulated depreciation is 100,000, which matches our depreciable base and gets our book value to 10,000. So with the straight line method, we don't really have to worry about that last year because the depreciable base and the maximum book value, they're all built into the math. With units of production, we have to be careful that we don't go over the allowed amounts. Otherwise, it is pretty much just the same as straight line depreciation, just using units of production or mileage instead of years or months.